My BF gifted me his underwear for my birthday gift. Alright, so picture this. Have you ever been with someone who made you question your own sanity? Someone who seemed to get a twisted thrill out of making you feel small? Because I was, and what he did next, well, it was so unbelievably cruel, so utterly humiliating, it changed everything. I'd been dating Alex for 2 whole years, and my birthday was just around the corner. He'd been hyping it up for weeks, right? Dropping hints about some special gift, something that showed how well he knew me. He told all our friends he'd outdone himself, and honestly, I was actually excited. Last year, he'd given me a half-dead plant from the grocery store clearance aisle and had the nerve to say it symbolized our growing love.
Yeah.
So my birthday dinner arrives, and Alex, being Alex, makes a huge production of it. He had me close my eyes, brought out this wrapped box with a big bow. Our friends were all there, phones recording, because he'd promised them the best gift reveal ever. I ripped open the paper. Inside, a plastic bag. And in that bag, 3 pairs of his used, stained boxer briefs. My heart just stopped. I remember thinking, asterisk, is this a joke? Is he serious? Asterisk, but there he stood, grinning like he'd handed me diamonds. He announced to everyone right there that these were his lucky underwear from important moments in our relationship. The pair from our first date. The pair from when we first said, I love you. And the pair from when we moved in together. He actually said, and I quote, now you can have a piece of those memories forever. The room went dead silent. My best friend, Heather, literally put down her fork, her eyes wide. But Alex just kept talking, oblivious. He launched into this whole lecture about how expensive gifts were just capitalism, and real gifts came from the heart. These boxers, he insisted, were priceless because they were part of our journey. He'd even written the dates on the waistbands with Sharpie, marking each memory. And the smell, oh God. It wasn't just laundry that needed washing. It was like he'd specifically worn them for days before bagging them. He then proudly explained he'd worn each pair for a week leading up to my birthday to infuse them with fresh memories. He called it seasoning them with love. When I didn't immediately gush with thanks, he actually got offended. Said I clearly didn't understand romantic gestures. He accused me of being materialistic for expecting something store-bought when he'd given me something no money could buy. His exact words were that they were marinated in our relationship.
I swear.
My friends left early. Heather texted me later asking if I needed help moving out. But Alex? He spent the rest of the night trying to convince me why this was actually the most thoughtful gift ever. He said other girlfriends would kill for such a personal present. He even claimed he'd read about some celebrity who sold their underwear for thousands, so technically he'd given me thousands of dollars worth of value. For the next month, the insanity continued. Alex kept asking why I hadn't displayed his gift. He wanted me to frame them. Frame his used underwear and hang them in our bedroom. When I refused, he said I was embarrassed by our love. He even told his mom I didn't appreciate meaningful gifts, and she called me ungrateful, saying he'd put thought into it, unlike other men who just buy jewelry. Then the truth came out. His coworker, Jake, let it slip. Alex had been bragging about testing me. He wanted to see if I loved him enough to accept anything he gave me. He'd made a bet with his friends that he could give me literal garbage and I'd pretend to love it because women were desperate to keep men happy. He won $50 when I didn't break up with him immediately. Jake even told me Alex was planning to give me his toenail clippings for Christmas to win a $100 bet. But the absolute worst part? Alex had been telling everyone I loved the gift. He posted on social media that his girlfriend was so touched by his creativity she cried. People commented relationship goals, and he hearted every single one. He even entered some online contest for most unique gift and wrote an essay about how modern women preferred sentimental over expensive. He was a finalist. That's when Brittany walked into my life. She was the new receptionist at Alex's office, and he'd been flirting with her for weeks. She had no idea he had a girlfriend. I invited her for coffee and we talked. Turns out, Alex had told her he was single and living with a roommate who was obsessed with him. That roommate?
Me.
His girlfriend of 2 years. Brittany was horrified. She told me Alex had asked her out for the upcoming Friday. I told her she should go. Valentine's Day was coming up, and Alex had already told me not to expect anything, saying, "We transcended commercial holidays. Real love doesn't need Hallmark's permission." Meanwhile, he'd made reservations at an expensive steakhouse for his date with Brittany. He told me he had to work late that Friday. I helped Brittany get ready for their date. Let her borrow my dress, did her makeup, even gave her a special gift bag to hand to Alex when he tried to kiss her goodnight. She was nervous, but she agreed, because he had lied to both of us. The date apparently went great, until the very end. Alex walked Brittany to her door and leaned in for a kiss. She stopped him, saying she had something for him first. She handed him the gift bag and told him it was from his girlfriend. Inside were the 3 pairs of used underwear he'd given me, now with my own additions. I'd written messages on them with fabric paint. Cheater, across the first pair, liar on the second, single now on the third. Brittany's text came through just a few minutes later, with a photo attached. I opened it to see Alex's face frozen in this perfect moment of pure panic. His mouth was hanging open, eyes huge, like someone had just told him his car was on fire. She added a message saying he literally stumbled backward off her porch step when she handed him the bag. I sat there, staring at that photo for a solid minute, zooming in on his expression, and felt this weird, quiet mix of satisfaction and relief wash over me. Heather leaned over my shoulder, took one look, and actually laughed out loud. Brittany's next text said he tried to play it off at first, doing this nervous laugh, claiming it was some crazy joke from his obsessed roommate. She wrote that she cut him off before he could finish his lie, telling him she knew everything about our relationship, the bet, all of it. He apparently tried to follow her inside to explain, but she shut the door right in his face. She watched through the peephole as he sat on her steps for 20 minutes, just staring at his phone, probably trying to figure out what to text me or how to spin this mess. I thanked her for going through with it, telling her she was amazing for not backing down when he tried to lie his way out. She said it felt good to stand up to him instead of being another person he manipulated. The rest of the evening was quiet. Heather and I ordered pizza and watched TV, both of us jumping every time my phone buzzed, but it stayed silent until almost midnight. Then it started. First, one call from Alex. I declined it, then a text asking where I was. Another call. Then 3 texts in a row, asking if we could talk. I showed each message to Heather as they came through. We just sat there, watching this meltdown happen in real time. The messages started out apologetic, saying he could explain everything, and it wasn't what it looked like. He wrote that Brittany misunderstood the situation, and he'd never actually done anything with her. He said the bet was just guy talk and didn't mean anything real. Each message got a little longer, a little more desperate as I kept not responding. By 1 a.m., he was sending paragraphs about how much he loved me and how we could work through this. Heather even made popcorn at some point, and we kept reading them out loud, shaking our heads at every new excuse. Around 2 a.m., the tone shifted completely. He must have figured out I told Brittany everything because suddenly I was the bad guy. The messages turned mean, calling me manipulative for setting him up like that. He wrote that I was crazy for ruining his date and trying to turn people against him. He said I had no right to go behind his back and talk to Brittany when I should have come to him first if I had concerns. The word concerns actually made me laugh out loud. Because I didn't have concerns. I had facts about him lying and cheating and making bets about humiliating me. He sent another message saying I was just mad because he didn't buy me expensive presents, and this was my revenge for not being materialistic enough. Then one calling me controlling and saying he should have seen the red flags earlier. I watched these messages appear, one after another, this whole progression from sorry to angry, and felt absolutely nothing. No urge to defend myself, or argue back, or try to make him understand. Just this calm certainty that I was done. I waited until 8 o'clock in the morning to respond. Let him sit with his anger and panic all night while I slept surprisingly well on Heather's couch. My text was simple. Just 7 words. We're done. I'll get my stuff this week. He called immediately, the phone ringing in my hand before I could even set it down. I watched his name flash on the screen and hit decline. He called again. Decline. A text came through asking me not to do this, that we needed to talk in person. I opened my settings and blocked his number, feeling this weird sense of power in that one small action. Heather came out of her bedroom and asked if I was okay, and I realized I actually was. Not happy exactly, but calm, clear, like I'd been carrying around this heavy thing for months, and finally just set it down. Saturday morning, Heather drove me back to the apartment while Alex was at work. We moved fast, efficient, both of us knowing we had maybe 4 hours before he might come home early or figure out what we were doing. I grabbed my clothes first, pulling everything off hangers and out of drawers, stuffing it into trash bags since I didn't have time to pack properly. Heather cleared out my bathroom stuff, throwing all my toiletries and makeup into a box. We got my laptop, my important documents, my favorite books, the blanket my grandma made me, everything that really mattered or that I couldn't replace. The whole time, I kept expecting Alex to show up, but the apartment stayed quiet except for us opening drawers and closet doors. We loaded everything into Heather's car in 3 trips, working so fast we were both sweating, even though it was cold outside. I took one last look around the apartment before we left, seeing all of Alex's stuff still there and none of mine, and felt relieved instead of sad. Heather's guest room was small, but she'd made it so nice for me. Clean sheets on the bed, towels folded on the dresser, and she'd even put fresh flowers in a little vase on the nightstand. I almost cried when I saw those flowers, because it was such a simple thing, but it meant she'd been thinking about making me feel welcome. She told me I could stay as long as I needed, that there was no rush to figure everything out right away. That night, I slept in an actual bed instead of the couch, and it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. No Alex in the next room, no walking on eggshells or wondering what mood he'd be in. Just quiet and safety, and a friend who had my back. Sunday afternoon, my sister Cadence showed up after I finally told her what happened. I'd been putting off calling her because I knew she'd be mad and want to drive out immediately, which is exactly what happened. She hugged me for a long time when she got there and then started asking practical questions about the lease and our bank account, all the stuff I hadn't wanted to think about yet. Cadence has always been the organized one, the person who makes lists and plans and doesn't let emotion stop her from handling business. She sat at Heather's kitchen table with a notebook and started writing down everything we needed to deal with. The joint account had to be handled first, she said, before Alex could drain it or claim I took more than my share. Monday morning, we went to the bank as soon as it opened. The woman who helped us was professional and didn't ask questions, even though she could obviously tell something was wrong. I had my ID and knew the account number and could answer the security questions. Cadence sat next to me while I filled out the paperwork to remove my name from the account. But first, I transferred out exactly half of what was in there. Not $1 more, not $1 less, just my fair share of what we'd both put in over the past 2 years. The banker processed everything quickly and handed me a receipt showing the transfer and the account closure on my end. Walking out of that bank, I felt powerful in a way I hadn't expected, like I was taking control of my own life instead of letting Alex make all the decisions. After the bank, we drove to the apartment building to talk to the landlord. Cadence came with me because she said landlords take you more seriously when you're not alone. He was in his office and seemed surprised to see me on a Monday morning. I explained that I needed to get off the lease early because my relationship with Alex had ended and I'd moved out. He asked a few questions about the situation, and I kept my answers simple and factual. Alex and I had broken up. I'd already moved my belongings. I wanted to be removed from the lease, but understood Alex would need to qualify on his own or find a new roommate. The landlord pulled up our lease on his computer and looked it over. After a minute, he said that since both our names were on it, I had every legal right to my belongings, and he could work with me on the lease situation. He'd need some paperwork filled out and would have to talk to Alex about either qualifying a loan or finding someone else to take over my portion, but he was surprisingly understanding about the whole thing, probably because he'd seen this kind of situation before. We scheduled a time later that week to finish the paperwork, and I left feeling like I'd checked another major thing off the list. Tuesday evening, I was sitting on Heather's couch, scrolling through my phone, when someone started pounding on her apartment door. The knocking was loud and aggressive, not the polite tap of a neighbor asking to borrow something. Heather got up from the kitchen table where she'd been working on her laptop and walked to the door. She looked through the peephole, and her whole body went stiff. She turned back to me and mouthed Alex's name. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him where I was staying and had blocked his number after our last exchange. Heather opened the door just wide enough to stand in the doorway, blocking his view inside. I could hear Alex's voice immediately, loud and angry, demanding to see me. Heather told him I didn't want to see him and he needed to leave. He raised his voice even more, saying I'd humiliated him in front of everyone and ruined his entire life over a stupid misunderstanding. He kept repeating that word, misunderstanding, like what he'd done was some innocent mix-up instead of calculated cruelty and cheating. I could hear other apartment doors opening in the hallway as neighbors checked out the noise. I stood up and walked to the door because I didn't want Alex making a scene that would get Heather in trouble with her landlord. I stepped around Heather and looked at Alex standing in the hallway. His face was red, and he had that expression he always got when he thought he was treated unfairly, like the world owed him something. I told him there was no misunderstanding about the bet he'd made with his friends to see if I'd accept garbage as a gift. There was no misunderstanding about him lying to Brittany and telling her he was single. There was no misunderstanding about him making dinner reservations to take her out while telling me he had to work late. He tried to talk over me, but I kept going, listing out everything he'd done with dates and specific details. He finally stopped yelling, and his expression changed to something almost pleading. He said he never actually slept with Brittany, so it didn't count as real cheating. Those were his exact words, that it didn't count because they hadn't had sex yet. I asked him if he thought that made it better, that he was planning to cheat, but just hadn't gotten around to it yet. He said I was twisting everything and making him sound worse than he was. A neighbor down the hall told us to keep it down, or she'd call the building manager. Alex looked at me like he expected me to invite him inside to talk privately, but I just stood there. After a minute, he turned and walked away, and I heard him kick the wall by the elevator before the doors closed. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Tyson asking if we could talk. Tyson had been friends with both of us since college, and I knew Alex would have already called him with his version of what happened. I almost didn't respond because I was tired of explaining myself and defending my decisions. But then I thought about how Alex was probably telling everyone I was crazy and dramatic, and I didn't want Tyson believing those lies. I texted back saying, "Sure," and he called me 5 minutes later. He started off carefully, saying he'd heard things were rough and asking if I was okay. I could tell he was trying to figure out whose side to take, without directly asking. I told him I'd send him screenshots of Alex's messages to Brittany, and he could see for himself what had been going on. I also explained about the bet, about Jake telling me how Alex had been testing me to see if I'd accept literal garbage, about finding out Alex was planning to give me his toenail clippings for Christmas to win more money. Tyson went quiet for a long time after I finished talking. Then he apologized for doubting me and said he should have known Alex was full of it. He offered to help me move my stuff out of the apartment and said he'd bring his truck on Wednesday afternoon when Alex would be at work. Wednesday came, and Tyson showed up at Heather's place at noon with his truck and a bunch of moving blankets. Cadence drove in again, even though she'd just been there a few days before, because she said she wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. The three of us drove to the apartment, and the landlord met us there with his keys. He unlocked the door and said he'd stick around to make sure there were no problems. Walking back into that apartment felt strange, like I was visiting a place I used to live a long time ago instead of somewhere I'd been just days before. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. We moved fast, packing my clothes into garbage bags and boxes, wrapping my dishes in newspaper, taking apart my bookshelf. Tyson handled the heavy stuff while Cadence and I sorted through drawers and closets, making sure we didn't accidentally take anything that was Alex's. The landlord sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, occasionally looking up to check on our progress. I was packing on my desk when I found a spiral notebook shoved in the back of the bottom drawer. I almost tossed it in the trash pile, but something made me flip it open. The first page had Alex's handwriting, listing out different terrible gifts he could give me, with dollar amounts next to each one. Used underwear was at the top, with $50 written next to it and a check mark. Below that was toenail clippings for Christmas with $100. A jar of his toenail clippings he'd been saving since September. There were other things listed too, each one worse than the last. Each one with a bet amount and the names of his friends who were in on it. Seeing it written out in his actual handwriting, seeing the planning that had gone into humiliating me, my hands started to shake. I felt sick, but also weirdly validated, because here was proof that I wasn't overreacting or being dramatic. This was real and calculated and cruel. I showed the notebook to Cadence, and she looked like she wanted to burn the whole apartment down. She took a photo of every page with her phone and told me to keep the original as evidence in case I needed it later. We'd been there about 2.5 hours and had most of my stuff packed when I heard a key in the front door. Alex walked in and stopped dead when he saw all of us and the boxes everywhere. He immediately started yelling about me stealing his stuff and how he was going to call the cops. Tyson stood up from where he'd been taping a box shut and pointed out that everything we were taking was clearly mine or had been given to me as gifts. Alex ignored him and kept yelling, getting louder and more aggressive. The landlord stood up and positioned himself between Alex and the rest of us. He told Alex to calm down and let us finish, or he'd be the one calling the police. Alex's face got even redder, and he started going through the boxes, pulling things out and claiming they were his. He grabbed my coffee maker and said he bought it, even though I'd ordered it online with my own credit card. He took out a blanket my mom had given me for Christmas and insisted it was his. I was carrying a box of books toward the door when Alex moved to block my path. He tried to grab the box out of my hands, and I held on tighter, telling him to back off. Tyson stepped between us and told Alex he needed to let me leave. Alex shoved the box and it fell, books spilling across the floor. Tyson put his hand on Alex's chest and pushed him back. Not hard, but firm enough to create space. The landlord pulled out his phone and said if Alex didn't go to the bedroom right now, he was calling the cops. Alex looked around at all of us, probably realizing he was outnumbered, and this wasn't going his way. He backed up toward the bedroom, still yelling about how I was a thief and a liar. He slammed the bedroom door so hard a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. We loaded the last boxes as quickly as possible. Tyson and Cadence made 2 trips down to the truck while I did a final check to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. As we were walking out, I heard the bedroom window open. Alex leaned out and shouted that I'd regret this, that no one would believe me over him, that he'd make sure everyone knew what a psycho I was. I didn't look up or respond. I just got in Cadence's car with the last bag of my stuff, and we drove away. Watching that apartment building get smaller in the side mirror felt like closing a book I never wanted to read again. That evening, I was unpacking at Heather's place when my phone buzzed with a text from Brittany. She asked how I was doing and if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I stared at the message for a minute, surprised she was reaching out. We'd worked together to expose Alex, but I hadn't expected us to actually become friends after everything. I texted back saying yes, figuring we both deserved a chance to compare notes and maybe find some closure. We made plans to meet Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop downtown that neither of us had been to with Alex. Thursday came, and I got to the coffee shop 10 minutes early. Brittany showed up right on time, looking nervous, like she wasn't sure if this was a good idea. We ordered our drinks and found a table in the back corner away from other people. The first few minutes were awkward as we both tried to figure out how to start. Finally, Brittany just launched into everything Alex had told her about his living situation. He'd said he owned the apartment and was renting a room to a former co-worker who developed an obsession with him. He claimed I was constantly trying to get him to date me, and he'd been too nice to kick me out. He'd shown her photos of the apartment and pointed out my stuff as examples of how I'd taken over his space without permission. She believed him completely, because why would someone make up something that detailed and weird? I told her about the bet and the underwear gift, and she put her hand over her mouth. She looked genuinely horrified, like she couldn't believe she'd almost dated someone capable of that. We ended up talking for over 2 hours, going through all the lies Alex had told each of us, finding places where his stories contradicted each other. By the end, I felt lighter somehow, like sharing the experience with someone who understood made it less heavy to carry alone. Brittany finished her coffee and pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots of the company handbook section about workplace relationships. She'd already highlighted the part about employees needing to disclose existing romantic relationships before pursuing someone else in the office. Alex had signed acknowledgement of these policies during his onboarding 2 years ago. She said she had an appointment with HR on Monday morning and asked if I wanted her to mention the bet, too. I told her to include everything because he deserved whatever consequences came his way. We exchanged numbers before leaving, and she hugged me, saying she was glad we met, even though the circumstances sucked. I showed up at Cadence's house that evening with 2 suitcases and a backpack. She took one look at my face and pulled me inside without asking questions. Her guest room had fresh sheets, and she'd put out clean towels and a new toothbrush still in the package. I slept for 12 hours straight that first night. The next few days blurred together in a pattern of sleeping, staring at my phone without really seeing it, and occasionally eating whatever Cadence put in front of me. She worked from home, so she was always around, but never pushed me to talk about what happened. On the 3rd day, she made me get dressed and walk around her neighborhood with her. We did 2 loops around the block, and I felt slightly more human afterward. She made me do it again the next day and the day after that. By day 5, I was actually noticing things like the houses we passed and the dogs people were walking. My phone buzzed on day 6 with a message from Jake. He said he needed to apologize for not telling me about the bet sooner. He explained that he'd assumed I knew Alex was a jerk and was staying with him anyway, which he realized now was a terrible assumption to make. He said he should have spoken up months ago when he first heard about it, but he'd convinced himself it wasn't his business. He felt awful watching me find out the way I did. I stared at the message for a while before typing back that I appreciated him telling me, even though the timing had been bad. He responded immediately saying he was serious about helping if I needed anything during the move or afterward. The next morning, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Owen's voice came through, sounding nervous and uncomfortable. He said he was one of Alex's friends who'd been in on the bet, and he needed to apologize. He sounded genuinely upset as he explained that watching Alex's behavior over the past 2 years had made him realize he needed better friends and to be a better person himself. He said being part of that bet was one of the worst things he'd ever done, and he'd been too much of a coward to say something earlier. He told me I deserved so much better than how Alex treated me, and he was sorry for being part of it. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked him for calling and hung up. Cadence asked who it was, and when I told her, she said at least some of Alex's friends had consciences. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments in my price range. I'd been avoiding thinking about the practical stuff, but I couldn't stay with Cadence forever. I pulled up rental listings and started filtering by price, location, and amenities. To my surprise, I could actually afford a decent 1-bedroom on my own. Not anything fancy, but a real apartment in a safe area with parking and laundry in the building. I'd always thought I needed to split rent with someone, but seeing the numbers laid out made me realize I'd been paying more than half of everything with Alex anyway. The idea of having my own space, with no one to answer to, felt exciting instead of scary. I bookmarked 5 places that looked promising and sent the links to Heather, asking if she wanted to come look at apartments with me over the weekend. Saturday morning, Heather picked me up from Cadence's place, and we drove to the first apartment viewing. The place was too dark and smelled weird, so we left after 5 minutes. The second one had a great layout, but the building manager seemed sketchy and didn't answer basic questions about maintenance. The third apartment was in a neighborhood that felt unsafe, even in broad daylight. We were about to give up when we pulled up to the 4th address. The building looked well-maintained with good lighting and security cameras. The apartment itself had big windows that let in tons of natural light, updated appliances, and fresh paint. The building manager, who showed us around, was professional and answered all my questions thoroughly. He explained the lease terms clearly and gave me contact information for current tenants who could tell me about living there. Heather and I looked at each other, and I knew this was the one. We thanked him, and I told him I wanted to apply. I filled out the application that evening and submitted it with all my documents. The building manager called me 2 days later saying I'd been approved. I drove over that afternoon to sign the lease, and it felt surreal seeing just my name on all the paperwork. No one else's signature required, no one else's income verification needed, just me making this decision for myself. The building manager handed me the keys and told me I could move in any time in the next 2 weeks. I sat in my car afterward, holding those keys, and felt something shift inside me. This was the first truly independent choice I'd made in 2 years without considering what Alex wanted or thought. My phone rang Wednesday evening with a number I recognized as Alex's mom. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She started talking immediately about how Alex had told her I'd moved out, and she wanted to understand what happened. Her tone was defensive at first, saying, Alex claimed I'd overreacted to a misunderstanding. I took a deep breath and calmly explained about the bet he'd made with his friends, the lies he'd told Brittany about being single, and finding his written plans to give me toenail clippings for Christmas. I told her about the notebook with dollar amounts and his friends' names. She went completely quiet on the other end for what felt like forever. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. She apologized for calling me ungrateful about the birthday gift. She kept talking and admitted she'd known Alex had problems with honesty and taking responsibility since he was young. She said she'd hoped he was growing out of it as he got older, and that being in a serious relationship would help him mature. Her voice cracked a little as she said she was sorry for defending his behavior and that I deserved so much better than how her son had treated me. She told me she'd raised him better than this, and she was ashamed of the man he'd become. I didn't know what to say, so I just thanked her for calling and apologizing. After we hung up, I sat there feeling strange about the whole conversation. Part of me appreciated her honesty, but another part wondered why she'd never intervened before if she knew he had these problems. Moving day finally arrived, and I met Tyson at my new apartment at 9 o'clock in the morning. He showed up with 2 other friends who'd heard what happened and wanted to help. We drove to Cadence's place first to load up everything I'd stored there, then headed to get the rest of my boxes from the storage unit I'd rented. Between the 4 of us, we got everything into my new apartment in one trip, making multiple runs up and down the stairs with furniture and boxes. Tyson and his friends didn't just dump everything and leave, either. They helped me unpack the kitchen, putting dishes in cabinets and organizing my pantry. They assembled my bed frame and got my mattress set up so I'd have somewhere to sleep that night. By early afternoon, my apartment was starting to look like an actual home instead of just empty rooms full of boxes. Tyson offered to help me unpack more, but I told him I had it under control and wanted to get settled at my own pace. They left around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I stood in my new living room looking at all my stuff finally in a space that was completely mine. No Alex to comment on where I put things or complain about my decorating choices. I ordered pizza for dinner and ate it sitting on my floor because I hadn't set up my dining table yet, and it felt perfect just being alone in my own place. Brittany texted Tuesday morning asking if she could stop by after work with a little something for my new place. I said sure, and spent the afternoon actually unpacking my kitchen boxes and organizing my cabinets the way I wanted them. She showed up around 6 o'clock, carrying a plant in a ceramic pot, this gorgeous, healthy fern with bright green leaves. She handed it to me, and we both started laughing because it was the complete opposite of that half-dead clearance plant Alex had given me for my birthday last year. This one came from an actual nursery, with a care tag and everything. We sat on my couch drinking wine, and she told me more about how things were going at work since the whole situation with Alex went down. She said he'd been walking around the office acting like nothing happened, but everyone knew the truth, and people were definitely treating him differently. I realized sitting there talking to her that she'd become a real friend through this whole mess, which I never expected when I first invited her to coffee to tell her about Alex's lies. Brittany called me Thursday afternoon with an update about the HR investigation at Alex's work. She said it had finally concluded, and he got a formal warning for violating their workplace relationship policies. Apparently, he'd been telling HR that Brittany made everything up and that she was obsessed with him, but she had the text messages and other people in the office had seen him flirting with her constantly. The HR person told Brittany that Alex would face serious consequences if there were any more issues. She said he'd been avoiding her completely since the investigation started, taking the stairs when he saw her near the elevator and eating lunch at his desk instead of the break room. The best part was that apparently he'd told some coworkers that Brittany invented the whole relationship to get attention, but nobody believed him because too many people had witnessed his behavior. I was scrolling through social media Friday night when I saw that Alex had posted a vague status about crazy exes and betrayal. He didn't name me specifically, but it was obviously about our situation, and he was painting himself as the victim. The comments were mostly from people who didn't know what actually happened, saying supportive things and asking if he was okay. I felt my stomach twist reading it, but then I just blocked him on everything. Facebook, Instagram, all of it. Within an hour, several mutual friends started messaging me asking for my side of the story. I sent each of them a simple explanation without getting dramatic or going into excessive detail. Just the facts about the bet he'd made with his friends, the lies he told Brittany about being single, and his plans to give me his toenail clippings for Christmas. I included a couple of screenshots of messages that proved what I was saying. Most people responded right away, saying they believed me and were sorry for what I'd been through. Over the weekend, more people from our friend group reached out. Some I hadn't heard from in months, but they all said basically the same thing. They'd suspected Alex was shady, but didn't know how to bring it up or thought it wasn't their place to interfere. One girl I knew from college told me she'd seen Alex hitting on someone at a party 6 months ago, but convinced herself she must have misunderstood what was happening. A guy from our weekly game nights admitted he'd always thought Alex treated me badly, but figured I must be okay with it since I stayed. It was validating to hear people say they believed me and saw the red flags, but also super frustrating that so many people had noticed problems and said nothing. I kept thinking about how different things might have been if even one person had pulled me aside and asked if I was really happy. Monday morning, I had my first therapy session. I'd made the appointment the week before because I knew I needed help processing everything that had happened with Alex. The therapist's office was in a quiet building downtown, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting that made it feel safe. I spent the first 20 minutes just explaining the whole situation, from the underwear gift to finding out about the bet to discovering he was cheating with Brittany. The therapist listened without interrupting and then started asking me questions about patterns in the relationship. She pointed out how Alex had always made me doubt my own judgment, like when he convinced me I was materialistic for not loving his terrible gifts, or made me feel crazy for being upset about things that were genuinely upsetting. She helped me see that he'd trained me over 2 years to be grateful for bare minimum treatment and to question my own reactions to his behavior. By the end of the session, I was exhausted, but also felt like I understood myself better. Cadence showed up at my apartment Wednesday evening with 4 bags of groceries. She said she wanted to make sure my kitchen was actually stocked with food and not just the random stuff I'd grabbed at the store. We unpacked everything together, and she organized my pantry while I put things in the fridge. Then we cooked dinner using the ingredients she'd brought, making pasta with vegetables and garlic bread. We ate at my little kitchen table that I'd finally assembled, and she told me how proud she was that I'd gotten out of that relationship. She said watching me tolerate Alex's treatment had been hard for her, but she'd respected my choices and waited for me to see the truth myself. She told me she'd been worried I might let him manipulate me into staying even after everything came out. So seeing me in my own apartment, living my own life, made her genuinely happy. Thursday afternoon, I ran into one of Alex's friends at the grocery store. I was picking up milk and turned down an aisle, and there he was, looking at cereal boxes. He glanced up, saw me, and immediately turned his cart around and went to a different aisle. I could see him through the gaps in the shelves, deliberately avoiding the sections where I was shopping. It stung for a second, because we'd been friendly before all this happened. But then I realized I didn't actually want friends who would defend someone treating their partner like a bet anyway. Anyone who knew what Alex did and still took his side wasn't someone I needed in my life. Heather picked me up Saturday night for a girls' night to celebrate my new place. She'd made reservations at this nice Italian restaurant downtown that we'd always wanted to try, but Alex said was too expensive. I put on a dress I loved that Alex had always criticized, did my makeup carefully, and felt good about how I looked. The restaurant was beautiful, with dim lighting and candles on every table. We ordered wine and appetizers and entrees without looking at the prices because we were celebrating. Heather raised her glass and made a toast to new beginnings and knowing my worth, and I felt emotional, but in a good way. We talked about everything except Alex and made plans for things we wanted to do together now that I had my freedom back. Sunday morning, I woke up to a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Alex, asking if we could talk and saying he was sorry for how things ended. The message was long and went on about how he'd made mistakes, but we could work through them if I just gave him another chance. I immediately took a screenshot and sent it to both Heather and Brittany for documentation, in case he tried to claim later that he never contacted me. Then I blocked the new number without responding. There was nothing he could say that would change what he'd done or make me want him back in my life. The landlord from my old place called Monday afternoon. He said Alex was being difficult about the remaining months on the lease and claiming I owed him money for breaking the agreement. I stayed calm and told the landlord I had text messages showing I'd paid my half of everything through the day I moved out, plus bank records proving all my payments. I offered to send him copies of everything. He said that would be helpful and that he'd handle Alex from there. He apologized for the hassle and said he'd make sure Alex understood I didn't owe anything. I hung up feeling relieved that I'd kept such detailed records of all our shared expenses. I started buying things for my apartment that I actually wanted instead of settling for what Alex thought looked good. A set of throw pillows in teal and gold that he would have called too bright. Wall art with abstract designs that he would have said made no sense. A rug with a pattern I loved that he would have complained clashed with everything. Every time I put something new in place, I felt like I was getting myself back piece by piece. The apartment was starting to look like mine instead of ours, and that felt really good. Brittany texted me Wednesday, asking if I wanted to do something fun this weekend. She suggested a pottery painting class at this place downtown that did wine and paint nights, but also had pottery sessions. I laughed when I saw the message because it was such a stereotypical post-breakup activity, and I told her that. She sent back a laughing emoji and said we might as well lean into the cliché if they actually helped. Saturday afternoon, we showed up at the studio and picked out plain white mugs to paint. The instructor showed us different techniques and color options, and we spent 2 hours painting and talking. Brittany made hers purple with little flowers around the rim. I painted mine with geometric shapes and different shades of blue. We joked about how Alex would probably think our designs were stupid, which made us laugh harder. But underneath the joking, it actually did feel good to do something creative with someone who understood what I'd been through. She got it in a way my other friends couldn't, because she'd been lied to by the same person. My therapy session Thursday afternoon went deeper than usual. My therapist asked me to think about why I'd stayed with Alex even when he disrespected me over and over. I didn't have a good answer at first. She walked me through different moments in the relationship where I'd made excuses for his behavior or convinced myself things weren't that bad. The half-dead plant gift, the way he criticized things I liked, how he made me feel materialistic for wanting normal birthday presents. She helped me see patterns I hadn't recognized before. I'd been so focused on not being demanding or difficult that I'd let him treat me like my feelings didn't matter. We talked about recognizing red flags early in future relationships and not ignoring my gut when something feels wrong. She said learning to value myself enough to walk away from disrespect was real growth, and I needed to remember that when I had moments of doubt. Jake sent me a message Friday evening. He said Alex had been complaining nonstop at work about how I'd ruined his life and made him look bad. Apparently, multiple coworkers had told him to shut up because everyone knew what he'd actually done. Jake said people were tired of hearing Alex play the victim when he'd been the one lying and cheating and making bets about his girlfriend. A couple of people had even told their boss about Alex's behavior because it was making the workplace uncomfortable. I felt satisfied reading that message. Alex deserved to have his reputation take a hit. He'd spent so much time telling everyone I was the problem that it felt good knowing people finally saw through his act. Late Saturday night, I was scrolling through my phone and found the screenshots I'd saved of the bet conversation and Alex's Christmas plans. I sat there staring at them for a while, feeling doubt creep in. Had I overreacted by exposing him so publicly? Should I have just broken up with him quietly and moved on? But then I reread the messages carefully. The bet where his friends discussed how much garbage I'd accept before leaving. The plans to give me his toenail clippings to win $100. The way they laughed about testing how desperate women were to keep men happy. This wasn't about one bad gift, or even the cheating. It was about someone who thought it was funny to see how much he could humiliate me while I smiled and pretended everything was fine. Someone who made our entire relationship into a joke for his friends' entertainment. I put my phone down feeling sure again that I'd done the right thing. Cadence called me Sunday morning and asked what I was doing for Thanksgiving next month. I hadn't even thought about it yet. She said I should come to her place instead of dealing with family drama about the breakup. She didn't want me sitting through dinner with relatives who might defend Alex or question why I left. I felt grateful hearing her offer. The idea of spending the holiday somewhere I didn't have to explain or justify my choices sounded perfect. I told her yes, and she started planning the menu, getting excited about trying new recipes. Wednesday evening, I finally unpacked the last box in my apartment. It had been sitting in the corner of my bedroom for 2 weeks, and I'd been avoiding it because unpacking the last box meant I was really done moving. Really done with that chapter. I opened it and found random kitchen stuff and a few books. I put everything away in its proper place, then hung up the final picture on my living room wall. Standing back and looking around at my space that was completely mine, I felt proud. 2 weeks ago, I'd been living with someone who made bets about how much disrespect I'd tolerate. Now I had my own apartment with my own things arranged exactly how I wanted them. I'd rebuilt my life faster than I thought possible. Heather came over for coffee Thursday morning and told me Alex had been trying to date other women, but nobody wanted anything to do with him. His reputation in our social circle was completely destroyed. She said he'd been going around claiming I was stalking him and spreading lies about him. But everyone knew the truth. People had seen the evidence. They knew about the bet and the cheating and the underwear gift. A few of his own friends had stopped talking to him after finding out what he'd done. Heather said one girl he'd asked out had literally laughed in his face when he tried to act like he was the victim in our breakup. Hearing that made me feel vindicated in a way I hadn't expected. I went on a first date Tuesday evening with someone I'd matched with on a dating app, just coffee, at a place near my apartment. Nothing fancy or high pressure. His name was JV, and he worked in marketing. We talked about our jobs and hobbies and favorite restaurants in the city. It didn't lead anywhere romantic, and I could tell by the end we weren't going to see each other again, but it felt good to sit across from someone who actually listened when I talked instead of interrupting or dismissing what I said. Someone who asked questions about my life and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Basic respect felt like such a novelty after 2 years with Alex that even a mediocre first date left me feeling hopeful about eventually finding something real. The landlord from my old place called Friday afternoon with good news. He'd reviewed all the documentation I'd sent him showing my payments and the text messages about the breakup. He said Alex was fully responsible for the remaining months on the lease since I'd properly documented everything and given appropriate notice about leaving. I didn't know Alex anything, and the landlord would handle all future issues with him directly. Hanging up that call felt like the final piece of closure I needed. No more financial ties, no more shared responsibilities, no more reasons to ever communicate with Alex again. I was officially free of him in every way that mattered. My boss called me into her office the following Monday morning, and I walked in expecting another project assignment. She closed the door and smiled at me in a way that made my stomach flip. She said she'd been watching my work over the past few months and noticed a significant improvement in my focus and output quality. She asked if I'd be interested in taking on the senior analyst position that had just opened up. The promotion came with a substantial raise and my own office instead of the cubicle I'd been working in. I accepted immediately and spent the rest of the day in a daze. Walking out of that building with a promotion letter in my hand felt surreal. For 2 years, I'd been too distracted by Alex's drama and manipulation to even think about advancing my career. I'd missed application deadlines and turned down opportunities because he always had some crisis that needed my attention. Now, without him taking up all my mental space, I'd apparently been killing it at work without even realizing it. The promotion felt like proof that leaving him had been the right choice in every possible way. Brittany texted me Wednesday asking if I wanted to meet for brunch on Saturday. I showed up at the cafe we'd picked and found her already seated with a huge smile on her face. She told me she'd started dating someone she met at her gym about 3 weeks ago. His name was Tony, and he worked as a physical therapist. She showed me photos on her phone and talked about how he actually listened when she spoke and remembered small details about her life. She said their second date, he'd brought her favorite coffee order without her having to remind him what it was. Basic thoughtfulness that felt revolutionary after dealing with Alex. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She said she was grateful we'd become friends through such a weird situation and thanked me for helping her dodge a bullet with Alex. She said if I hadn't reached out and told her the truth, she might have wasted months or even years on someone who saw her as a game piece instead of a person. We spent the rest of brunch talking about her new relationship and my promotion and how our lives had improved since cutting Alex out. The friendship that had formed between us felt unexpected but genuine. I went to a home goods store Thursday evening after work and spent an hour looking at bedding options. My current sheets and comforter were ones Alex had picked out years ago because they were on sale. They were ugly and uncomfortable, but I'd never bothered replacing them. I chose a soft gray comforter with matching sheets in a much higher thread count than I'd ever owned before. At home, I stripped the bed completely and stuffed the old bedding into a garbage bag. I made the bed with the new sheets and comforter and added throw pillows I'd picked out just because I liked them. Sleeping that night in bedding Alex had never touched felt like washing away another layer of his presence from my life. The bed was mine now. The apartment was mine. My choices were mine. I woke up the next morning in that clean space and felt lighter than I had in years. A card arrived in my mailbox the following Tuesday with Alex's mom's return address on it. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won out. Inside was a handwritten apology, saying she'd had time to think about everything and realized she'd been wrong to defend Alex's behavior. She said she'd raised him to be better than how he'd treated me, and she was ashamed that she'd made excuses for him instead of holding him accountable. She included a $50 gift card to my favorite Italian restaurant downtown. Her note said she hoped I'd find someone who treated me the way I deserved, and that she was sorry for her part in making me feel like I was the problem. I stood in my kitchen reading that card 3 times. The apology felt genuine in a way that surprised me. It didn't change what had happened, but it did make me feel seen and validated by someone who'd initially blamed me. I signed up for a cooking class I'd wanted to take for years. Alex had always said cooking classes were a waste of money when we could just watch videos online for free. He'd shot down the idea every time I brought it up until I stopped mentioning it. The class met every Thursday evening for 6 weeks and focused on Italian cuisine. I showed up for the first session nervous, but excited. The instructor was patient and funny, and the other students were friendly. We made fresh pasta from scratch, and I took home containers of what we'd prepared. Learning something new just for myself, with no one criticizing or minimizing my interest, felt incredibly freeing. I texted Cadence a photo of my pasta creation, and she responded with 3 heart emojis and said she was proud of me for doing something just because I wanted to. That simple validation from my sister made me realize how much I'd been missing that kind of support. Tyson called me on a Sunday afternoon and invited me to his birthday party the following weekend. He said it would be at his place with about 20 people. I immediately felt anxious about seeing mutual friends and having to navigate questions about the breakup. He must have sensed my hesitation because he quickly added that Alex definitely wasn't invited and everyone there knew what had happened. He said people wanted to see me, and I shouldn't let Alex's actions keep me from my friends. I agreed to come and spent the week leading up to it feeling nervous. The party turned out better than I expected. People hugged me and asked how I was doing, but nobody brought up Alex or made things awkward. Heather was there and stayed close to me for the first hour until I relaxed. I spent the evening talking and laughing with people who'd chosen my side when the relationship ended. Leaving that party, I realized I had real friends who valued me as a person, not just as Alex's girlfriend. My therapy session the following week focused on trust and boundaries. My therapist said I'd made remarkable progress over the past few months in recognizing my worth and learning to trust my instincts again. She said when I first started coming to see her, I'd questioned every feeling I had and constantly second-guessed my reactions to Alex's behavior. Now I was setting clear boundaries and recognizing red flags without needing external validation. She said the work I'd done to rebuild my self-esteem was impressive, and I should be proud of how far I'd come. Hearing that from a professional made me realize just how much Alex had damaged my ability to trust myself. The fact that I was healing felt like a victory I'd earned through hard work and honest self-examination. 3 months had passed since I'd walked away from Alex, and I found myself genuinely happy. I'd gone on a few more casual dates with different people, but nothing serious had developed yet. That didn't bother me because I was enjoying building my life on my own terms. My apartment felt like home. My job was going well, and I was excelling in my new role. My friendships had deepened now that I wasn't constantly distracted by relationship drama. I spent Saturday mornings at farmers markets and Sunday afternoons reading in coffee shops. I took myself to movies and restaurants without feeling like I needed someone else to make the experience valid. Most importantly, I respected myself in a way I hadn't when I was with Alex. I'd stopped accepting crumbs of affection and calling it love. I'd stopped making excuses for bad behavior. I'd stopped shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. Brittany and I met for coffee on a Wednesday evening and started planning a trip for next spring. We decided on a beach destination, just the two of us going somewhere warm and fun. We looked at resort options on our phones and talked about activities we wanted to do. She joked that Alex had accidentally given us both a gift by showing his true colors before either of us wasted more time on him. I laughed and agreed. If he'd been slightly less terrible, we might have stayed and convinced ourselves things would improve. Instead, his behavior had been so obviously awful that leaving became the only logical choice. We raised our coffee cups in a mock toast to dodging bullets and finding real friendships in unexpected places. A mutual friend got engaged and threw a party to celebrate. I almost didn't go because I knew there was a chance Alex might be there. Heather convinced me to come, promising to run interference if needed. I walked into the party and immediately scanned the room. Alex was there in the corner talking to someone I didn't recognize. Our eyes met across the room, and I waited for some feeling to hit me, anger, or sadness, or regret, or anything. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing. He was just another person at a party. Someone I used to know who no longer had any power over my emotions or my life. I turned away and joined Heather at the food table without giving him another thought. That complete indifference felt like the truest sign I'd actually moved on. Cadence came over on a Thursday evening with Thai food, and that look on her face that meant she wanted to have a real conversation. We sat on my couch, and she told me she was proud of how I handled everything with dignity. She said watching me refuse to let Alex's manipulation make me doubt myself had been impressive, especially when so many people initially questioned my decisions. Her support throughout the whole process meant everything to me because there were moments when I wondered if I was overreacting or being too harsh. Having someone who knew me well validate that I'd made the right choices helped me trust my own judgment again. She stayed late, and we talked about how far I'd come in just a few months. And when she left, I felt genuinely good about the person I was becoming. I started looking at animal shelter websites over the weekend and found myself getting excited about adopting a cat. The idea of coming home to a pet I chose in an apartment I picked, living a life I designed, felt like the happy ending I actually wanted. Not some big romantic gesture or dramatic reconciliation, just the quiet satisfaction of building something stable and mine. I filled out applications at 2 different shelters and scheduled visits to meet some cats they thought would be good matches. One was an orange tabby named Mango who apparently loved sitting in sunny spots, and the other was a black cat named Pepper who needed a quiet home. Both sounded perfect, and I couldn't stop thinking about which one would fit better in my space. Heather texted me Wednesday asking if I wanted to have a wine night at my place. She said she'd bring snacks and supplies for a project she had in mind. When she showed up Friday evening, she had 2 bottles of wine, cheese, crackers, and a metal fire pit she'd borrowed from her neighbor. We set it up on my tiny balcony, and she pulled out the box of photos I'd mentioned still having from my relationship with Alex. We spent an hour going through them first, laughing about how miserable I looked in half of them and how obvious it was that something was wrong. Then we started burning them one by one, watching his face curl up and disappear in the flames. It was dramatic and silly, but also surprisingly healing to literally watch those memories turn to ash. We laughed about how ridiculous the whole underwear gift was from the start. How we should have known right then that he was testing me instead of loving me. By the time we finished the second bottle of wine and the last photo, I felt lighter than I had in years. Looking back now, I'm actually grateful the situation happened when it did, because it taught me to recognize my worth and never, ever settle for someone who treats me like a joke. If Alex had been slightly less terrible, I might have stayed longer and wasted even more time convincing myself things would improve. Instead, his behavior was so clearly, obviously wrong, that leaving became the only logical option. And that clarity? That was a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time. I'm excited about my future in a way I wasn't when I was with him, confident I'll never tolerate that kind of disrespect again. My life is so much better without Alex in it, filled with real friends, genuine respect, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly what I deserve and refusing to accept anything less. So, tell me, have you ever had that moment when you realized someone you loved was just testing you? What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below.